They smiled at me, then called security behind my back. The smile came first, warm, practiced, and that's how I knew I was already in danger. I didn't know it yet, not in that moment, but something had already shifted in the air. The kind of shift you feel before a storm breaks. 1 minute you're just standing there, mind on your list, feet aching slightly in sensible shoes, and the next minute your chest tightens for no clear reason. I remember thinking it was indigestion, or nerves, or maybe just that familiar tiredness that settles into a woman who's been carrying too much for too long. The store smelled like new fabric and artificial citrus, that clean, almost sharp scent they pump through places to make you feel safe. Welcomed.
Scene.
I was holding a navy blue cardigan, rubbing the sleeve between my fingers.
Soft. Too soft to be cheap.
I had picked it up for my sister's birthday. 62 deserved softness, I thought. Lord knows life hadn't been gentle with her. That's when the young woman behind the counter smiled at me. Not a lazy smile. Not a bored one. A full smile. Teeth showing. Eyes narrowing just enough to seem sincere. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said.
Ma'am.
Polite. Southern trained, maybe. I smiled back, nodded, and kept browsing. That was the first smile. The second came from a man pretending to straighten a rack near the exit. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away when our eyes met. His smile was quicker, thinner. It didn't reach his eyes. And somewhere between that second smile and the third, I felt it. That old, unwelcome feeling. The one that whispers, "Don't relax yet." I wish I could tell you this story began with shouting, or a confrontation, or something loud enough to justify the hurt that followed. But the truth is, it began quietly, respectably, wrapped in politeness. That's how these things usually start. Before that day, my life was simple in the ways that matter. Not easy, just honest. I was 54 years old, a mother of 2 grown children, and a grandmother to 1 little boy who believed I hung the moon. I worked as a patient liaison at a private clinic, not glamorous, but meaningful. I listened to people when they were afraid. I explained things slowly. I held hands when doctors were too rushed to. I had learned over the years how to make myself small when needed and firm when required. That balance comes with age, with scars. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom flat with cream walls and too many throw pillows. Sunday mornings were for gospel music and tea strong enough to wake the dead. I still ironed my clothes, still believed how you presented yourself mattered. Not because I thought it earned respect, but because it reminded me of who I was. That day, I had dressed carefully. Not to impress anyone, just to feel like myself. A soft brown coat, pressed slacks, pearl studs my mother left me. My hair was wrapped neatly, makeup light. I looked, by all accounts, like what people love to call respectable. And maybe that's why what happened next hurt as deeply as it did. Because even respectability wasn't enough. The shopping trip wasn't special. I had finished my morning shift early and decided to walk through the mall before heading home. The holidays were coming, and I like to get things done early. Less rush. Less noise. I moved slowly, letting younger people hurry past me. There's a freedom that comes when you stop racing the clock. The store, one of those mid-range department shops, was bright and busy, but not crowded. Soft music played overhead. Something jazzy. A song I almost recognized. I noticed the staff more than usual. How they seemed to orbit me without ever quite landing. One woman folded shirts 2 tables away, glancing up every few seconds. A man walked past me twice with an armful of hangers he never put down. I told myself not to be silly. You've been watching too much news, I thought. Not everything is about race. That's the lie we tell ourselves to stay comfortable, to avoid the ache of being right. I picked up 2 cardigans and a scarf, held them against my chest like armor. When I turned toward the fitting rooms, a small sign caught my eye. Fitting rooms temporarily close. Of course. I sighed, placed the scarf back, and decided I'd just take the cardigan to the register. If it didn't fit my sister, I could exchange it later. As I walked toward the counter, the smiling young woman met my eyes again. "There you are," she said, like she'd been waiting. Her tone was sweet. Too sweet. I handed her the cardigan. She scanned it, then paused. "Oh," she said softly, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Could you just wait one moment?" "For what?" I asked, still smiling. She glanced past me, then back again. "Just a quick check." A check of what? She didn't say. She pressed something beneath the counter, a button I hadn't noticed before. And that's when I heard it. The walkie-talkie crackle.
Low.
Almost hidden beneath the music. Security to women's wear. My stomach dropped. Not because I knew, but because I understood. There are moments in life when time slows, not for drama, but for survival. Your body takes over before your mind catches up. My shoulders stiffened. My breath shortened. I felt suddenly aware of my hands, empty, open, harmless. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't done anything wrong. And yet, my heart began to pound like I had. People around me kept shopping, laughing, unaware. That's the loneliest feeling of all, when the world keeps moving while you're standing in the middle of something breaking. I looked at the young woman behind the counter. Her smile was still there, but it had changed. It no longer reached her eyes. Before I continue, let me ask you something, my besties. Where are you listening from today? Here in the UK, the US, or somewhere else? And as you listen, I want you to tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? This is Voice of Mrs. Addison, and this story is not easy to tell, but it's an honest one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because what comes next is where the truth finally steps into the light. The sound of approaching footsteps has a way of announcing itself before you see who's coming. A heavier rhythm, slower, deliberate. I heard them before I turned around, leather soles against polished tile, measured and unhurried, like whoever was walking already knew the ending of this story. I stood there, cardigan still on the counter, my fingers curled inward now. I hadn't realized I'd clenched them. The young woman finally looked up at me again. "It'll just be a moment," she said, softer this time. Not kinder, just quieter. As if volume alone could lessen the insult. "Is there a problem?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Years of customer service had trained me well. "Don't let them see you shake." She hesitated. Just a fraction. Long enough to tell me the truth lived somewhere behind her eyes but wasn't coming out of her mouth. "It's store policy," she said. That sentence, vague, hollow, has been used to excuse 1,000 small cruelties. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. I turned to find a security guard standing just close enough to invade my space without touching me.
Tall. Broad.
Navy uniform crisp to the point of stiffness. His badge caught the overhead lights and flashed. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. No greeting. No explanation. I looked from him to the cashier. "What's going on?" I asked again. The guard glanced at the cardigan, then at my coat, then at my bag. A modest leather tote, worn at the corners from years of faithful use. He didn't ask permission before reaching for it. "Could you open your bag, please?"
Please.
As if politeness could disguise suspicion. A small crowd had begun to form, not deliberately but organically. People sense tension the way dogs sense fear. A woman behind me shifted her weight. A teenage girl stared openly, chewing gum with wide, curious eyes. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I haven't stolen anything," I said. The guard's expression didn't change. "We just need to make sure." That's when it hit me, not like a slap, but like a slow, spreading bruise. They didn't think I stole. They were checking in case I did. Because of how I looked. Because of who I was. Because in their quiet calculation, I fit the profile. I opened my bag with shaking hands.
Slowly.
Deliberately. I wanted them to see there was nothing hidden. Nothing sneaky. Just my wallet, my phone, a packet of mints, my glasses case. The guard peered inside, then nodded once.
"Thank you," he said.
No apology. No acknowledgement. Just finished. I thought that was it. That the humiliation had reached its peak and would now recede like a tide. I was wrong. "Actually," the cashier said suddenly, her voice too light, "there's been some concern."
Concern.
About what? I wanted to scream. About who? The guard turned back to me. We've had reports of missing merchandise, he said. And you were seen moving between sections. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's called shopping. A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. I'd like you to come with me to the back, he continued. Just to clear things up. My stomach twisted. No, I said quietly. He blinked, surprised. I haven't done anything wrong, I repeated. And I'm not going anywhere. There it was, the moment when dignity has to choose between fear and self-respect. The guard's jaw tightened. Ma'am, if you don't comply. You'll do what? I asked. Arrest me for buying a sweater? Silence fell heavy around us. That's when a manager appeared, a woman in her late 40s, hair pulled tight, lipstick flawless. She smiled, too. Everyone did. I'm so sorry about this, she said, placing a hand on the counter as if steadying herself. It's just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Another word that smooths over harm without erasing it. She turned to the guard. It's fine. She's clear. Just like that.
Clear.
As if I'd been cloudy before. The guard stepped back. The crowd dispersed, interest fading now that the show was over. The manager leaned closer to me. You understand, she said softly. We have to be careful. Careful of what? I wondered. I picked up the cardigan and slid it toward her. I don't want it anymore, I said. Her smile faltered. Just a little. I'll be contacting corporate, I added. And I'll need your names. The cashier swallowed. The manager straightened. Of course, she said, her tone cool now. That's your right. I walked out of that store with my head high and my chest hollow. The mall lights seemed harsher. The air heavier. I sat on a bench outside and stared at my hands, willing them to stop trembling. I had been smiled at. And then, behind my back, I had been labeled dangerous. When I got home, I didn't cry right away. I made tea, changed my clothes, sat at my kitchen table and stared at the steam curling upward. That's when the tears came, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, exhausted. I thought of my mother who used to say, no matter how clean your dress is, some folks will still see dirt. I thought of my son, my grandson, the world they were growing up in. And I realized something else had been taken from me that day, not my money, not my pride, but my sense of safety. That night, sleep refused to come easy. My body was in my bed, but my mind was still standing under those bright store lights, replaying every second like it might reveal a different ending if I looked hard enough. I kept hearing the walkie-talkie crackle, kept seeing the way the cashier's smile had changed, how quickly warmth can turn into calculation. Around 2 a.m, I gave up and went into the kitchen. The clock above the microwave glowed a soft green. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, feeling the cool laminate against my palms. I told myself it was over, but something in my chest whispered that it wasn't. The next morning at work, I found myself flinching every time someone approached my desk. I smiled too much, apologized too often. The same habits I'd spent years unlearning came rushing back like muscle memory. Trauma has a way of reopening old drawers you thought you'd emptied. My colleague Ruth noticed first. She always did. You all right, love? She asked, lowering her voice as she handed me a file. I opened my mouth to say yes. The lie was already formed. Instead, I exhaled. Something happened yesterday. She sat down without asking, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Do you want to talk about it? I told her, slowly,
Carefully.
like the words themselves were fragile. By the time I finished, her mouth was set in a thin line. That's profiling, she said. No hesitation. No softening. I nodded. I know. And you're going to report it. It wasn't a question. I think I have to, I said. If not for me, then for whoever comes after. Ruth reached over and squeezed my hand. Good. That afternoon, I called the store's corporate office. I expected to be brushed off, redirected, placed on hold until my resolve dissolved. Instead, the woman on the line listened. She asked for dates, times, descriptions, names. Her voice was neutral, professional, but not dismissive. "We take these matters seriously," she said. I wanted to believe her. Over the next few days, emails followed. A formal complaint, a case number, promises of investigation, and then silence. A week passed. Then two. Life resumed its rhythm, but something inside me remained offbeat. I found myself scanning rooms, watching hands, measuring smiles. That's when the letter arrived. Not from corporate. From my daughter. She called it checking in. 3 pages. Neatly typed. She said she'd heard from her friend, a former employee at that very store, about an incident. Said she hoped I wasn't making a bigger deal than necessary. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She wrote, "Mum, you know how things can be misinterpreted. Not everything is racism." I read that line 3 times. My own child. I called her immediately. "Mum, calm down," she said before I could speak. "I'm just saying." "You're saying I imagined it?" I interrupted. "I'm saying maybe they were just doing their job." Her voice was careful, measured, like she was afraid of stepping on something sharp. "And what about my job?" I asked. "My job to walk through the world without being treated like a suspect." She sighed. "You're always so sensitive." Sensitive. That word again. I ended the call politely, calmly. Then I sat on my bed and let myself feel the second betrayal. Quieter, but deeper. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was corporate. They wanted to meet. In person. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Gray sky. Light drizzle. The kind of weather that presses everything flat. I wore the same brown coat. Not as a statement, but as armor. The office was sleek. Glass walls. Minimalist furniture. The kind of place designed to make emotion feel out of place. 2 representatives sat across from me. A man and a woman. Both smiling. They apologized. Carefully. Corporate apologies are like rehearsed monologues. All the right words. None of the weight. They said the staff had acted in error. That training would be reviewed. I listened. Then I spoke. I told them about the walkie-talkie, the button under the counter, the way my bag had been searched in public view, the way my dignity had been handled like an inconvenience. I watched their expressions change, not dramatically, but incrementally. A tightening here, a furrow there. When I finished, the woman cleared her throat. "We'd like to offer compensation." I raised my hand. "No," I said. "What I want is accountability." Silence stretched. "We will be taking disciplinary action," the man said finally, "including termination." The word landed heavy. I nodded once. Not because I wanted anyone to lose their job, but because actions have consequences. The story didn't end there. It never does. Within days, word spread. Not loudly, but enough. A local paper reached out. Then another. I declined interviews. I didn't want fame. I wanted change. But something else happened. People started sharing. Messages flooded my inbox. Women. Men. Stories eerily similar to mine. Different stores. Same smiles. Same security calls. I realized then, my story wasn't just mine. It was ours. What surprised me most wasn't the attention. It was the quiet. The kind that follows after something has already cracked open. For years, I had learned how to swallow moments like that one in the store, learned how to file them away under let it go, and it's not worth it. But once the emails started coming in, once the messages stacked up like folded letters on my kitchen table, I realized how much silence I had been carrying that wasn't even mine alone. One woman wrote from Birmingham, another from Chicago. A man from a small town in Georgia said he'd been stopped 3 times in the same store, each time with a polite apology and no explanation. Different lives. Same wound. I read every message slowly. Sometimes twice. Sometimes with my hand pressed to my chest because it felt like too much truth all at once. The injustice wasn't loud. It was routine. Embedded. Practiced. And for the first time, I let myself stop asking whether I was too sensitive. I wasn't. I was awake. The store manager called me one evening. Her voice was tight, not angry, but controlled, like someone holding a lid down on boiling water. I wanted you to hear this from me directly, she said. 2 employees have been let go. I closed my eyes. And the security guard? I asked. He's been reassigned pending further review. Pending. I thanked her. Hung up. Sat in the quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt heavy. Because accountability doesn't erase humiliation. It just acknowledges it existed. That night, my son came over. He brought takeaway, fried rice, still warm, and my grandson, who ran straight into my arms like nothing in the world had changed. Children have a way of anchoring you back to what matters. After dinner, my son stayed behind while his boy fell asleep on the couch. "Mom," he said, resting his elbows on the table. "I heard about what happened." I waited. He rubbed his hands together, a habit he'd had since childhood. "I'm proud of you." Something in my chest loosened. "You didn't have to go through all that alone," he added. "I know," I said quietly. "But sometimes you don't realize how alone you are until after." He nodded. "I've been thinking about my son, about what kind of world he's walking into." "So have I." We sat there in shared understanding, the kind that doesn't need fixing. The backlash came softly, but it came. An anonymous email called me dramatic. Another accused me of playing the race card. Someone wrote that I should be grateful the store was keeping customers safe. I deleted them. Not because they didn't hurt, but because I finally understood something. People who benefit from silence always resent the sound of truth. A month later, I was invited to speak at a community forum. Just a small gathering. Folding chairs. Lukewarm coffee. People who wanted to listen. I almost declined. But then I remembered how it felt standing at that counter, how powerless I had been when no one spoke up. So I went. I didn't rehearse. I didn't raise my voice. I told my story the same way I was telling it now, calmly, honestly, without polish. When I finished, a young woman stood up. Tears streaked her cheeks. "That happened to me last week," she said. And just like that, the room shifted. Change doesn't always arrive in headlines. Sometimes it shows up in posture, in the way people start meeting your eyes again, in the way policies get rewritten quietly, without fanfare. The store implemented new training. Mandatory.
Documented.
Ongoing. Was it enough? I don't know, but it was a start. My relationship with my daughter took longer to heal. We met for coffee one Saturday morning. Neutral ground.
Public.
Safe. She stirred her drink too long before speaking. "I didn't understand," she admitted. "I didn't want to believe it could still be that bad." I studied her face, the familiar lines, the inherited eyes. "I know," I said. "But believing me would have cost you less than disbelieving me cost me." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. But it was real." I went back to the mall weeks later. Not to prove anything. Just to remind myself I belonged. I walked slowly, breathed deeply, held my head high. No one stopped me. But even if they had, I was no longer the woman I'd been before. I had found my voice, and I intended to keep it. Before I continue, let me ask you something, my besties. When the world tried to make you small, did you ever find the courage to take up space anyway? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, a breath that doesn't catch, a step that doesn't hesitate, a smile that doesn't feel forced. For weeks after everything settled on the surface, I still found myself pausing at doorways, still scanning faces, still measuring how much of myself I could safely bring into a room.
I didn't tell anyone that part.
Strength, I'd learned, is often mistaken for silence. But late one evening, as I folded laundry in my bedroom, I realized something had changed. My shoulders weren't tight. My jaw wasn't clenched. I was humming, an old tune my mother used to sing while sweeping the porch. I stopped folding and stood there, holding a warm towel against my chest. I was healing. I began doing small things differently. I stopped apologizing before speaking. I corrected people when they interrupted me, calmly, without edge. I took up space in rooms the way men my age always had. Not aggressively. Not defiantly. Just fully. At work, I asked to lead a patient care workshop. When someone questioned whether I was up to it, I smiled and said, "Watch me." The room laughed. The tension eased. And I led it beautifully. One afternoon, my grandson asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Grandma," he said, swinging his legs from the kitchen chair, "why were those people mean to you?" Children ask the truest questions without armor. I knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. "They were scared of what they didn't understand," I said. "But that doesn't make it right." He nodded slowly. "Did you do anything wrong?" "No," I said. "I didn't." "Then you're brave," he said simply. I held him longer than usual that day. The store sent a formal letter months later. Not the polished corporate kind, but one signed by an actual person. They outlined changes, training, oversight. At the bottom, one sentence stood out. "Thank you for holding us accountable." I placed the letter in a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Life didn't transform overnight. The world didn't suddenly become kind or fair. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I trusted myself now. My instincts. My memories. My truth. I no longer needed permission to name what I experienced. On the anniversary of that day, I went shopping again. Different store. Same brown coat. As I reached for sweater, a young woman smiled at me. This time it was different. Not polished. Not practiced. Just human. I smiled back. And kept shopping. Before I finish, let me ask you something, my besties. If something like this happened to you tomorrow, would you speak up? Or would you stay silent to keep the peace? There's a strange thing about wounds that come from humiliation. They don't bleed. They don't bruise in places people can see. They settle somewhere deeper, in posture, in breath, in the way you enter rooms already bracing for impact. For a long time after that day, I thought healing meant forgetting. It doesn't. Healing meant remembering without shrinking. The last real test came when I least expected it. I was invited to my grandson's school for a Grandparents' Day event. Simple affair. Plastic chairs. Crayons on the tables. Children buzzing with noise and sugar. As I signed in at the front desk, the security guard, a different one, younger, glanced at my name badge a little too long. For half a second, my chest tightened. There it was. That old reflex. But then something new happened. I didn't look away. I met his eyes.
Calm.
Steady. Unafraid. He nodded politely and waved me through. And I realized the power had shifted. Not because the world had suddenly become safe, but because I no longer handed my safety over to other people's assumptions. Later that afternoon, I watched my grandson stand on a small stage and recite a poem he'd practiced all week. His voice shook at first, then steadied when he found me in the crowd. Our eyes met. He smiled. And I thought, this is why I spoke up. Not for applause. Not for justice headlines. But so this child could grow up seeing a woman who didn't disappear when she was wronged. On the train ride home, I reflected on how easily that day in the store could have ended differently. If I had stayed silent, if I had laughed it off, if I had gone to the back room quietly just to get it over with, no one would have known, but I would have. And I would have carried that silence like a second bag, heavy, unnecessary, and handed to me without my consent. What people don't tell you about dignity is this. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in quiet decisions, like saying no when you're pressured to comply with disrespect. Like insisting on names. Like refusing to be rushed past your own truth. I still shop. I still smile at strangers. I still believe most people mean well. But I no longer confuse politeness with safety. And I no longer let anyone convince me that discomfort is the same as misunderstanding. Because I know what I felt. And I trust myself now. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. You don't owe silence to anyone who profits from your discomfort. And you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay calm and refuse to move. Before we close, let me ask you something, my besties, and this one matters. Have you ever been smiled at while someone quietly prepared to humiliate you? Have you ever walked away from a place knowing you were welcomed on the surface, but watched underneath? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And tell me where you're listening from today. Here in the UK, the US, or somewhere else entirely. I read your words. I sit with them. You're not speaking into the void here. This is Voice of Mrs. Addison. If this story touched something in you, if it stirred a memory, or gave language to something you've never been able to explain, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to feel seen. Because these stories aren't just mine. They're ours. And sometimes telling them out loud is how healing finally begins. Yellow Heart.